virus and that an accidental leak here was highly unlikely. Instead, they say the most probable path of the disease was from an animal into an intermediary animal, then into human beings, but that much more research on this is needed. In their final report, they'll urge for greater integration of global scientific databases and for new studies to be conducted into how this virus survives on frozen surfaces.
The number of registered births in China fell by 15% last year to just over 10 million. It's the fourth year in a row that there's been a dramatic decline in the number of new babies. This comes despite a change in China's notorious family planning rules 5 years ago to allow couples to have 2 children. A space probe launched by the United Arab Emirates is about to enter a critical phase in its mission to Mars. The Hope spacecraft is the first of 3 due to arrive this month. Here's our science correspondent, Jonathan Amos.
It may be February, but this is the month of Mars, when 3 space missions will arrive at the Red Planet. First up is the Emiratis Hope probe. The UAE spacecraft must light its braking engines for just under half an hour to be sure of being captured by Mars gravity. Get it wrong, and Hope risks either slamming into the planet or skipping off into ever deeper space. Just behind Hope is a Chinese spacecraft, and behind that is another big American rover.
Iran's intelligence minister has said in an unusual remark that his country could develop a nuclear weapon if it felt threatened. In an interview on state television, Mahmoud Alavi likened Iran to a cat that might act unpredictably if cornered. Iranian officials have always insisted that the nation's nuclear program is for purely peaceful purposes. The second impeachment trial of Donald Trump begins in a few hours in the US Senate. The former president is charged with inciting insurrection in a speech to supporters before the deadly riot at the US Capitol just over a month ago. Mr. Trump's lawyers say the violence was perpetrated by those who attacked Congress of their own accord. They also argue that a former president can't be impeached. A BBC correspondent in Washington says the defence team makes no mention of election fraud, one of the reasons Mr. Trump summoned his supporters. World News from the BBC. The investigation into the helicopter crash that killed the retired basketball star Kobe Bryant and his teenage daughter has found that the pilot experienced spatial disorientation during the flight due to cloudy conditions. The US National Transportation Safety Board also said the pilot was not licensed to fly in cloud. 9 people died, including the pilot, when the chopper crashed into a hillside near Los Angeles in January last year. The Russian gunmaker Kalashnikov, producer of the AK-47, has announced plans for a shotgun that can sync with smartphones to attract younger customers. Here's Mike Sanders.
Kalashnikov's chief executive, Dmitry Tarasov, has set his sights on potential customers even younger than him. He's 37. He told a Russian business channel that he wanted to attract Generation Z, people who couldn't imagine life without gadgets. The smart shotgun would offer the thrill of an adrenaline rush without letting users forget it was a weapon, he said. Russia is not immune to gun violence. Last month, a conscript who'd been bullied was jailed for killing 8 soldiers, and a Columbine-style high school shooting and suicide in 2018 left 20 dead.
The joint leader of the Maori Party in New Zealand has been ejected from Parliament for refusing to follow rules on wearing a tie. Leaving the chamber, Rawiri Waititi called ties a colonial noose. Hungary's leading independent radio station, Club Radio, has lost a court appeal against closure. It's often critical of the government. Nick Thorpe reports.
Founded in 2001, Club Radio has provided a platform for mainly liberal and left-wing voices in Hungary. The Media Council, the government-controlled media regulator, has tried several times to close it down, citing violations of media rules, which include not playing enough Hungarian-language music. The station says attempts to silence it are political.
So we stack up these massive 35 metric ton bricks on top of each other in a cylindrical fashion. and it is like an interlocked Lego system.
My kids would be absolutely blown away by this. It's like you're building a giant castle with these robot arms and then taking it down and putting it up again.
Yeah, and if we walk over here to the hook here, you see that it's lowering, but it's been described sometimes as a massive Jenga set.
People fixing the world.
Hello, this is People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service. I'm Tom Coles. We're the programme that looks for interesting solutions to some of the world's problems. And this week, we're going to meet some people who are aiming to help in the fight against climate change by working out new ways of storing electricity. They're making gigantic batteries, but one's based on physics instead of chemistry. And they're using volcanic rock, molten salt, spinning weights, and, as we heard just then from Robert Piccone, massive bricks. And to move massive bricks, you need some massive machines. Okay, so I'm looking at this video screen. There's mountains in the background, and in front of me, it's like this giant tower with a space station on top of something. What are we looking at here?
So this is a tower crane standing about 70 meters tall, so almost like a 25-story building. And as we look up this tower, up on top these 6 different arms, which are the 3 different levels of 2 arms each spinning and rotating, so like a clock. So think about, instead of 2 arms of a clock, as you typically see, there are 6 arms on a clock spindle.
Robert is the CEO of a company called Energy Vault. He's showing me their demonstration site in Switzerland through a video link. So we've got the sound from Switzerland, Robert's in California, and I'm in London. They're still testing the technology at the moment, and those huge Jenga bricks weren't actually stacked when we spoke. Robert told me they'd recently built a tower 20 metres high at the site. Each of those 6 arms on the crane has a motor inside.
And each of those have a cable that's connected to these massive 35 metric ton composite bricks that are lifting and lowering these bricks to both store the energy while the system is charging, and as it's lowering the brick, discharging the energy back to the electricity grid.
So this gigantic robotic octopus is basically a battery.
Yes, it is a storage mechanism utilizing gravity. So it is a gravity-based battery. These bricks at height, they become what's called potential energy. Potential becomes kinetic or very real energy when we lift the brick from its height and lower it, and that turns a motor that creates electricity. And it's the equation from your high school physics class of mass times gravity times height.
So why on earth would someone invent a system to use electricity to lift up blocks and then generate electricity by lowering them again? Seems like a bit of a waste of effort on the face of it. What's it got to do with fixing the world? Well, basically, to fight climate change, we need to get more and more of our energy from solar and wind power. But you don't want the lights to go out when the sun goes behind a cloud, or at night, or when the wind drops. If you've ever seen a coal power station, they generally have a massive pile of coal next to them, so they can pump out more power when it's needed. The technologies we're looking at today are the version of that coal heap, but for renewable energy.
Our ideal design is to take excess wind, for example, that blows at night when there's not the demand for the power, or excess solar during the day when the demand is not high enough to consume all of the power produced by solar. And we take that excess energy and it turns the motors that lift up these massive bricks.
That point is key. The idea is that you generate more electricity than you need when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, and then store some of that excess electricity for when you need it.
And it's fundamental that we do that so that we can stop using, for example, coal plants or natural gas or any type of fossil fuel plant, so that we can begin to shut those down.
Storing excess electricity is already being done at a huge scale, using water. 85% of the world's energy storage involves pumping water up to a reservoir on the top of a mountain and then sending it pouring back down through a generator when you need the energy back. But these systems involve huge dams, often in beautiful places, and so take years of planning. What's more, if you don't have the mountains, you can't build the dams.
We have mirrored, essentially, these large pumped hydroelectric dams to essentially do the same process, but being able to build these cranes anywhere in the world at any site.
But there's big competition for this market. Around the world, energy companies are also using lithium-ion batteries to store power. Those are the batteries used in electric cars. But there are some problems with that technology.
So it degrades over time. So what that means is you have to spend money to replace those lithium cells.
Everyone with an old phone knows the frustration of a worn-out battery that doesn't stay charged. So to run a power grid, you have to keep replacing the batteries. At the moment, the vast majority of these batteries aren't recycled, potentially creating a big waste problem for the future. What's more, there are serious environmental concerns over the way lithium is produced in the first place.
And there's other safety factors with lithium ion in terms of fire safety, for example, and these chemical fires that can be very, very deadly and dangerous.
The companies we're looking at today all think they can solve the problem of energy storage in a way that's better for the planet than lithium-ion batteries. Which brings us back to our tour.
I want to walk you over to a covered shelter here, which is right adjacent here to our energy storage tower. And within here we have our brick machine and brick fabrication system. We want to do that locally at the site to minimize the greenhouse gases from the transportation sectors.
Now the bricks, which each are about 4 meters high, look a bit like concrete. But concrete itself has a very big carbon footprint. We've covered that on this program in the past.
So these bricks are made up of 95% from the soil from the site that we excavate. But in addition, we can use other waste materials, things like coal ash, for example, or tailings for mining, meaning materials that otherwise companies have to spend a lot of money to dispose of and actually landfill.
They then add in some stuff to hold it together, a mixture developed by Mexican cement manufacturer Cemex that only uses a small amount of cement. Then they mix it in with a big robot arm and just squish that mixture in a mold.
Into a brick, into a very hard brick.
Robert says that once those bricks have been stacked up, they can withstand high winds and earthquakes. They'll meet the same regulations as buildings of the same height. The cranes are completely automated, so there are no people on the site who could be hit by falling bricks in the event of an accident. Some energy is lost in the lifting of the blocks, but the winches are pretty efficient.
We can store 82 to 83%.
If this number's right, then that's a bit more efficient than pumping water up mountains, but not quite as efficient as lithium-ion batteries, which can hit 90% efficiency. However, Energy Vault say they're going to be cheaper than batteries in the long run. And although they haven't had a tower up and running commercially yet, and have only been going for 3 years, Robert is confident.
You're going to see the first deployments of our technology this year. We've already contracted for over 700 megawatt hours of deployment of systems.
Depending on the size, that could be around 20 towers, each one storing enough energy to power a couple of thousand average European homes for a day.
I think compared to any new technology, I think you'd agree to have this to market at commercial scale in less than 3 years is pretty amazing.
We're on a tour of the energy storage technology that could help speed up the transition to a green power grid. Our next giant battery is in Hamburg, Germany. It's a windy day, drizzling too, and Hassan Ozdem from Siemens Gamesa is explaining why they've painted a giant purple mammoth on the side of their building.
As we use volcanic rocks for our technology, we came up with the idea, well, it's basically like Stone Age because it's really old and simple stuff we're using. So we came up with the phrase, which you can read maybe on top, which is "Welcome to the new Stone Age."
This is a big painting. On what looks from here, I'm in my bedroom in London. It looks to be a huge concrete block. So what is that?
So what you can see here is the actual storage chamber. As you said, it's a big chamber out of concrete, which is just basically full of stones. It's basically like an oven. The rocks inside are very simple rocks, volcanic rocks. Let me show you a couple of them.
Okay, so you're showing me there, they're just small black rocks. It's like large gravel on the floor. It looks like a car park or something.
Yes, it's very simple rocks, which you can find anywhere on the planet because, you know, they're always being generated when you have a volcano. And this is the type of material that we will use to save and store the energy. We basically use excess electricity and then use basically a giant hairdryer with a heater and a fan like you have at home. And we turn electricity into hot air. And if you can see at the entrance of the chamber, you have very huge steel pipes. Can you see them here? Two of them.
Oh yeah, okay. So those are massive steel pipes, which must be
2 meters exactly across. When the hot air is pushed through the normal stones, like in any oven, they are heated up. Once you need the energy back, what you do is you push cold air from the other side. Let me go there. You push cold air through the hot stones, which can, you know, we use temperatures up to 800 degrees. And with that hot air, we go into a normal water steam cycle, which means we boil water, we have steam, and then go into a steam generator and get the electricity back that we want to supply.
So we're talking about storing energy, and it strikes me that there's a very obvious thing that you've got to deal with here, which is that those stones must slowly cool down.
We lose only less than 0.5% per day, which means we lose approximately only 3 to 4 degrees per day, which means that storing all the solar energy up to 1 or 2 weeks is not an issue.
And so the critical thing in all these technologies are efficiency numbers, basically. In your system, what are the numbers? What's the bottom line?
So the bottom line is between 40 and 45% because the water steam cycle, so turning heat back to electricity, is very inefficient. But what we also can do here is not only supply electricity, but heat.
Fighting climate change isn't just about green electricity. We also need green heat for industrial processes and to keep our homes warm.
So this facility was also built with the mind to, in parallel, supply electricity and heat. And if you supply heat, then the efficiency goes up to 95%, 98%. Because turning electricity to heat is very efficient and very simple.
The 1,000 tons of hot rocks can store 130 megawatt hours of electricity, enough for 1,500 homes for just over a week. There's another selling point to this technology too, which might come in very handy in the big climate change transition to come.
The water steam cycle is basically the biggest part of every coal or conventional power plant. So what we are proposing to our customers is, at the moment, every country is forcing utilities to shut down coal power plants.